Avery, whose show is this? And we're live. Welcome, everybody, here to the Lakers Lounge Podcast. I'm Anthony Irwin, Senior Lakers Insider for Clutch Points, joined on this fine Friday afternoon, your favorite day of the week, by the People's Insider, Jovan Buha of The Athletic, of Buha's Block. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well, man. It's been a nice week of resting and recharging, a bit earlier than expected, but I've had some semblance of normalcy for the past few days.
That's I checked out your pod with Dan and with Dave and with Kobe. Really cool idea. Really kind of takes people behind the scenes of everything that goes into beat reporting. And you know, I was there for a couple of the games while you guys were all on the road, and doing two of those games, two of the 41 games that you guys are out on the road for. I got back from both of them. I'm like, I don't know how they go and do another 39 of those. So one, I wanted to say that was a really cool project that you guys did. You know, just kind of that conversation was really cool. And two, yeah, I wanted to you know, having experienced even just a little bit of it, say like, holy shit, guys, thank you guys for all the work that goes into beat reporting. That's nuts.
It felt like this year in particular, I don't know why it caught up to me more from like, I've just been, I feel like more tired than normal this season, but like I could say my body has enjoyed the last few days, but of course watching the second round and just imagining what that could have looked like for the Lakers, like that's obviously been disappointing, I'll say.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like you get to the end of that, it's almost bittersweet, right? Where you're like, all right, finally we get to take a deep breath. You know, we all get to chill for a little bit, but then you're also like, yeah, but we did all of that work and we have a month less of content than we probably should have, you know? And that's where we kind of arrive here. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today on the show. The last time you and I spoke, we were both optimistic going into the postseason. We got to stop doing that.
Wow.
So we'll talk about what went wrong, what we were wrong about, why we were wrong, I guess. And then we'll talk about what the Lakers will need to do to avoid that happening again in this upcoming offseason with some of the stuff that maybe we're hearing already. And then there's this topic that's been nagging me since the offseason began. And I know it's written on the side of the screen there, Luka versus JJ. It's not contentious or anything like that. This isn't ESPN, but I keep on running up against the notion of the way Luka wants to play and the way JJ wants to coach. And I kind of feel like those two things are a bit at odds. So I'm going to run that by you a little bit too. Quick reminder, please hit that subscribe button. Please hit that like button. Please hit that share button as well. That stuff helps quite a bit. And then also make sure you guys are checking out all of the work that Jovan is doing at The Athletic for Buha's Block. We are technically colleagues at Odyssey, so check out his podcast as well. Let's dive on in, though. We'll start with that series. And both you and I, Jovan, headed into the postseason thinking well beyond that first round. And it happens pretty often. I'm a married man, so I'm used to being wrong. But I'm
learning. It's been about 9 months for me, so yeah, I'm learning.
Right. So like even if it isn't that I'm used to being outright wrong, it's at least looking at situations through a lens of I should probably find a way that I was wrong here just to keep the boss happy. And in this case here, the part of it that I'm hung up on is how I went in going Lakers in 5. I don't know what your final prediction was there. Turned out being
Lakers in 6.
Yeah, Wolves in 5. So the series gets flipped. The biggest difference to me in terms of expectations going in was going to be the Lakers' clutch time offense and fourth quarter offense. That was a disaster What would you say went the most wrong in that series to have a series go in a direction that made so many people completely wrong?
I would say there's two things that really stood out to me. It's a combination of the Lakers' lack of frontline size. And I know we've talked about it before, like these centerless lineups were technically big, but clearly going up against a team like Minnesota, I mean, they're arguably the biggest front line in the NBA or in that conversation. You saw like that there's levels to it, both in terms of the size, physicality, strength. And I also think the taxing nature of how the Lakers had to play because they were so small, it just required so much more from everybody, especially Rui and DFS. And I think there was a compounding effect that affected those guys at various points in terms of their shot making and just their overall energy and will to fight in the paint. So I think playing, it's one thing to do it in the regular season, especially when you can play Jackson Hayes 18, 22, 26 minutes and get away with playing smaller for 15 to 20 minutes. But when you've basically given up on Jackson Hayes and you're playing small for 40 minutes, 44 minutes, like that's where I think that starts to affect the group collectively throughout the course of a series. So I thought you saw the Lakers progressively wear down, I think just due to the discrepancy in the paint in particular, with the size, with the strength, with the physicality. But the other thing, and it might even be the bigger thing in my opinion, is the offense. And the offense just never clicked. And I know we're going to touch on Luka versus JJ, so I don't want to spoil any of that stuff. But like this offense just never materialized the way that we thought it could have or should have. And the fact that, you know, I am pro analytics and you get into offensive rating and different, half court rating versus transition, all that stuff. But like just basic math, looking at the Lakers barely being able to crack 100 points consistently in this series, like that's a credit to Minnesota and their defensive acumen and their size and their physicality and their game planning. But the Lakers like should have been a better offense, and we saw kernels of it down the stretch of the regular season, and it felt like they were starting to potentially turn a corner, but that ended up being fool's gold. And ultimately, I just look at like this group never put it together offensively in a way that it should have for all the firepower of Luka, LeBron, Austin, multiple role players who shot high 30s, low 40s from three during that stretch. It just never quite actualized into what it could have been. And to me, that's the thing. Like I thought the defense ranged from like okay to subpar, but like there were times that it was the defense was fine or even good. The offense rarely looked good in that series, and I think that is the thing that they're gonna have to figure out this summer.
Yeah, it was one of those alarms that I was trying to sound over the back half of the season when they got Luka in. And it started as, okay, they need reps. And I thought Darius made a good point on the LFR pod where he was like, I think they practiced maybe 4 total times after the Luka trade. They had that insane March schedule where it was a game every other day. And sometimes that was a slow point in that March schedule, was getting a day off occasionally. So I think the reps played a role in it too, but I still just kept on wondering, hey, are you guys going to run anything with Luka and Austin, or with Luka and LeBron, or are you going to get back to running the stuff that you were running with LeBron and Austin? Where did the north and south pick and rolls go that really allowed those guys to pierce the defense? Because they don't have the foot speed athleticism to pierce the defense on their own. Austin is shifty, but it usually takes multiple moves for him to get by somebody, which takes important seconds during a shot clock. LeBron and Luka are both kind of cudgels when it comes to the way that they, break defenses. It's not a swift knife going in there. It's usually just putting your head down, getting an inch, and then making it so that defender can't get back into the play. And I just thought like the main point of, for lack of a better term, constipation with this offense against the Wolves was there was no force, right? It was a lot of step back jumpers. It was a lot of ball rotating around the perimeter without much penetration going in. It was just kind of stuck, especially and then it would start that way, and then by the time we got to the fourth quarter, their like will to live looked like it was kind of gone offensively, and it was just your turn, my turn, and it was the worst version of them. Do you get the sense that, or do you even think that it is possible that there's an offense that is less reliant upon your turn, my turn between Luka and Austin and LeBron?
I think so. I mean, if you look at, and I have not tracked this as closely as Kranjis, of course, but like he's put out the numbers of when they run organized offense versus when they freelance, and the discrepancy there. It not only affects the overall team and their overall offense, but each individual player, Luka, LeBron, and Austin, were all better within organized actions versus freelancing. And clearly the Lakers and Kranjis are tracking that in different manners based on some of the things that JJ had said publicly. So I think the Lakers need to.
I could tell that JJ was tracking it too, because it seemed to me, and you were there asking these questions, and actually this is something that I was hoping to talk to you about today, but JJ seemed particularly feisty when he was asked about the organized offense, and it kept on coming up, and it kept on coming up. And it seemed to me some of the frustration was like, we know, like we want to run it too. We're just kind of stuck. And I'm not blaming anybody per se, but did you get that vibe at all too?
Yeah, I did. And I don't know. I think it could have come from one of two places or maybe three. Like one, I think JJ has historically been someone very online and very in the weeds. Yeah. And I don't know how online he was during the season, but I'm sure there was probably some knowledge of the discourse and how much Lakers Twitter and just Lakers fans were talking about the offense and the organization. Two, I think to your point, like I think he was aware of it. I think he was just trying to kind of figure out the way to actually get the team to do it. And then three, I think by nature, this has been an issue at times for this group preceding JJ, maybe not to the extent like late in the season, but this has been a bit of an issue for them. And then you have Luka coming in and the way that he wants to run offense. And I just think that there was a lot of chefs in the kitchen with the offense late in the season. So I think JJ was aware of it. It just, you at some point you have to figure out like how to actually do it. And to your point, like the lack of penetration, I think they turned into far too much of a finesse offense. And just changed their entire structure and like shot profile once they got Luka compared to where they were with AD, which had some benefits in terms of the 3-point shooting and the increase in volume, but there's also some more variance with that. They were not getting to the free throw line as often. They were not getting into the paint or getting to the rim as often. But yeah, I mean, I think it's something that they're going to have to figure out. I do think there is a path to it. Another thing with me is the sliding doors moment of the Rui and LeBron injuries back to back, because if you just look at the rhythm that they were in at that point, then Rui misses 3 weeks, LeBron misses 2 weeks. And it still took them another like week and a half to 2 weeks to really find their rhythm again. So I just wonder if those two guys don't go down and they still have them for that 3-week period and they continue to build on it, both in terms of like on-court reps, but also just evaluating the offense, tinkering with things. I think this group is potentially the 2 seed. And with how they went out in round 1, maybe they go out to Golden State and Lakers fans are even more upset with the end of the season. But like, I think they probably win 53, 54 games. They push Houston potentially for the 2 seed, and they have that extra 3 weeks of 10, 12 games to build upon. And I think they would have gone into the playoffs with a bit more momentum than they had. And I think that's actually something, one of my biggest takeaways kind of from this postseason in general is like, I think I'm starting to weigh the results of the final like month and a half to 2 months a little bit more. Just seeing the way like Minnesota closed the season, even the Clippers, I thought they blew that series against Denver. I thought they were the better team overall in the aggregate. They just couldn't close that series. But like there have been some trends of how teams have closed the season, in my opinion, going into the playoffs more so this postseason than in previous postseasons. And I think that was true with the Lakers, where they were a bit shaky there down the stretch. There were some nice wins, but I think that is something to factor in moving forward, at least for me, in terms of how I evaluate playoff matchups.
Especially in the Lakers case, as it was, there's just not much sample size there with Luka in a Lakers uniform. And for like a third of it to be kind of shaky as it was, or maybe even more than a third, maybe like a half of it, where guys were in and out of the lineup and, it was just kind of survival mode versus it's like the difference between surviving and living, right? Is they were basically just trying to get to the end of the postseason. Whereas if you have a little bit more time, maybe you can implement a few more things and you can get some practice time in there, and you aren't so focused on getting and keeping guys healthy, and you're more building towards something at the end of the season. I think that's a really good point. I think also one thing that I've been kicking myself a lot over is the Lakers won a championship in 2019, 2020. Bigger, faster, stronger was the theme of that, right? They were huge on the front court. They were big all over the place positionally. They were athletic. They were physical. They were just mall teams. And by the end of those series, I think most of them ended on blowouts, I feel like. And especially the finals, right? They're up by 40 in a finals clinching game. And the Lakers in this series looked a lot like those teams looked like playing against the Lakers in 2019, 2020. And you look around, and I think Golden State might be the exception that proves the rule, where there's, with the way that the game is being called, the intensity going into every possession, I think size matters a hell of a lot more in the postseason. And the way that the Lakers went into this, I think one thing I'm going to carry into next season is I'm not going to allow myself to be fooled by innings eater lineups when I know in the postseason, small ball, I think it's good in small doses. It's an important pitch to be able to throw, but it can't be the entire sole focus of your identity, because eventually you're going to run into a bigger team, and that bigger team is eventually just going to suffocate that small ball out. Do you think, I'm not saying that it's the end of small ball, but I do think we're kind of remembering again, where we're getting a kind of clear reminder of how important size and physicality is in the postseason.
100%. I think there's been a pendulum shift back toward that. I think if you're seeing some of the teams that are looking to advance, like in the New York Boston series, for example, like New York's size has been a real thing, and their ability to, I think, dictate the terms from a physicality perspective. Minnesota did that against the Lakers. Houston, I think, was only able to push Golden State to 7 because of that, right?
Yeah,
like I think from a talent and skill perspective, Golden State clearly had the better team and probably should have won that series in 5 or 6. But because of that size and physicality discrepancy, Houston was able to muck things up and stretch it to 7. So I think that's a big thing that has shifted. That also, I think for the Lakers' purposes, like I think it's shifted the center market a bit. And I went through every center contract in the NBA, and I'm like, there aren't many great options in terms of trades. And then even looking at free agency, like 2 popular names I've seen linked to the Lakers or thrown around, Miles Turner, Naz Reid. I don't think either one of those guys is going to be available to the Lakers.
No.
I think both of those guys should be $20+ million a year guys, and the Lakers at most can potentially clear the non-taxpayer MLE of about 13 to 14 million starting out, but that also hard caps you at the first apron. So they're going to have to shed some salary, which is going to require draft compensation going out. And then that is kind of like your potential one move, depending on what you have to give up. So I just looking at the center market, it's not great. And I think teams are going to be prioritizing keeping their size or having a higher asking price for the size. So for the Lakers kind of moving forward, like they need to acquire more size. They need to certainly improve the center position. But looking at the potential options as of right now, I would say it's a pretty depressing market, just looking at free agency and or the trade market.
Yeah, the name that I keep hearing a lot is Claxton from Brooklyn. Lakers and Nets had conversations about it last year. But when the Lakers had AD on their books, they didn't like the idea of adding a $30 million a year center in Claxton. And then by the time that they made the Luka trade, they were all kind of out of sorts, and they didn't have necessarily the contracts that weren't tied to a rotation player to send out for Claxton. Now they kind of do, right? You do have Maxi Kleber's contract. I think the Lakers are a lot more open to moving Gabe than they were at last year at the deadline. I guess if Brooklyn is really adamant, maybe you throw Rui or Reeves into, or not Reeves, but Dorian's expiring into that deal if he opts in.
Trade him back to the Nets.
That would be funny, yeah. But yeah, I think that he's a name that kind of keeps coming up. But I think part of the reason he keeps coming up is because there aren't very many other names to bring up. They're just, you mentioned Miles Turner, time's a flat circle. It is yet another year after 2020, whatever, that we're going to be talking about Miles Turner in a Lakers uniform potentially. The free agent market is pretty bereft of the kinds of centers that the Lakers need. And this is kind of what Raj and I talked about the other day. I think a lot of the Lakers improvement is actually going to have to come internally, and with some schematic improvements, with some chemistry built between LeBron and Luka in Austin, and kind of going from there. They are going to add, I think they will come out of the offseason with, I would probably predict 2 or 3 new centers would be my guess. But they only have one first to work with, and they have the number 55 pick in the draft to work with. That's just not very many assets that you're looking for. And by the way, whatever they do this offseason, they're going to be doing that with an eye towards the future, because they need to keep some powder dry for whenever LeBron leaves, and they need to go out and get a second star for Luka, which also complicates matters a little bit. But we'll get to the offseason preview here in a second. Last thing on this Minnesota series and last season overall, the Lakers, I think, I'm not going to go so far as to say fooled us, but I keep coming back to how far away we were from this might be the second best team in the West, to holy crap, they got blown out by a team that lost its first game to Golden State. And yeah, Minnesota might beat Golden State in the series, but it probably is going to have a lot to do with the fact that Steph isn't going to be able to play. Where do you think that comes from? How far that giant gap from our expectations going into this postseason and where things land here? Are the Lakers much further away from title contention than we thought going into the postseason?
I don't think so, because I think we look at the 5-game series result, but within the context of the series, you have game 3, Luka gets some type of stomach bug, food poisoning, whatever it was. I still don't have clarity on that, but he is puking. He's a game time decision. And clearly, if you rewatch that or just watched it live, you see he is not himself on either end of the ball. And, he's out there, so you don't want to necessarily use that as an excuse, but that's just the reality of the situation. LeBron has an amazing game, and the Lakers are still within it with a few minutes left, and then Minnesota closes on that 13-1 run. So I think, again, I'm not trying to paint any moral victories here, but just the context of game 3 was a winnable game. I think if Luka does not have whatever he was dealing with, they potentially win that game. Then game 4, we was an interesting second half, we'll say, right? But they were still right there. And if the correct call gets called and Luka is whistled, or Jaden McDaniels whistle for a foul, Luka goes to the free throw line, at least makes one, if not both free throws. Lakers are either tied or up by 1. They have 30 seconds to get a stop. And even if they don't get a stop, they get a final possession to either tie or win the game. So I think it really just came down to the margins, and Minnesota clearly was the better team within the margins, and they deserve the win, and they won in 5. But I think there is a alternate reality here where it's at least 2-2 going back to LA, if not potentially even 3-1 in LA's favor. Now, even if it was 2-2, I think the Lakers still probably lose this series. It's just a matter of, like, Minnesota was the better team, so I'm not trying to take anything away from them. I just think the result maybe, I think several things went against the Lakers that had one or two of them gone in their favor. We're talking about a 6 or 7 game loss, which is still disappointing, but maybe not as jarring as a 5 game loss as the team with home court, as the favorite in the series. But I think this was a really bad matchup for them in terms of the size. Like, on paper, I knew that. I just didn't expect Rudy Gobert to have the Game 5 performance that he had. I didn't expect Julius Randle to be arguably the third best player in the series, like, in totality. So, like, I didn't like Julius Randle. We had a sample size of him in the playoffs. He's not been very good. He broke out and had definitively the best series of his career. Several of their guys outplayed the Lakers role players, and, like, the Lakers role players had held their own against other good role players like in OKC and Memphis and Houston. And so some of these things just went against the Lakers that we didn't necessarily anticipate. I think JJ had, some of his struggles with decision making and the rotation and just making adjustments. So, like, there's a lot. It was kind of a perfect storm of things going against LA. I think it was closer than the result indicated, but it was definitive enough that, like, Minnesota deserved to win. They deserve to advance, and the Lakers do have to make some changes. But I think if you keep the core, find the right center, and just add some, like, the back end of the roster. I know that's not why they lost the series, but, like, barely having 10 playable players, I think, like, you need more depth in 2025. So, like, they need to address the back end of the roster and at least push that to, like, 12 or 13 guys you feel comfortable playing. You're not going to play 12 in the playoffs, but, like, I do think that was something that cumulatively impacted them, where they just did not have a lot of depth, and I think that caught up to them at some point.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if you aren't going to play 12 or 13 in the postseason, you should be able to play 12 or 13. Your rotation should go 12 or 13 deep in the regular season, and they could never do that at any point in the season. There was never a 12th or 13th player on the Lakers that you were comfortable going into a game. And yeah, part of that, you look at the back end.
JJ clearly didn't feel like there was 6 guys he could trust.
That's true. It was insane to me, Jovan, that, he had that moment that obviously went viral where he dropped the mic and he stormed out of the presser before the game. Reggie Miller said during the game that during the green room meeting that JJ had to be kind of calmed down a little bit too. JJ's going to have to, read some Zen books or something before they go into the postseason next year. But yeah, they definitely, I agree 100% that their rotation going into next season, it can't start at 10 and then work its way down. It needs to, start at 13 and then get whittled down over the course of the season.
Well, and not to bring this up, but, like, looking at Gary Trent, and that was a guy that I know we both reported on last summer of his interest in playing for the Lakers and them not having a roster spot for him. And because of this whole Cam Reddish, Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes debacle with the player options. And it's like, if the Lakers didn't give those guys player options that they shouldn't have given to them, they would have had an open roster spot to potentially sign Gary Trent Jr., who was an actual difference maker in the playoffs on a minimum contract. So, like, that's the margins part here, or even honestly, I mean, like, the Alex Len situation too, that was just another wasted roster spot. So, like, I'm not saying Christian Coloco or Trey Jemison changes this series, like, on its face, but just having that option of Jackson struggling, you don't have another big, like, I would have rather seen them throw out a Christian Coloco or Trey Jemison for, like, 3 minutes just to see what that looked like, rather than Maxi Kleba after missing 3 months, or just going small and playing the same group for an entire half. Like, they just ran out of options. And I think part of that, again, you don't want to be playing your 13th player. Like, your third string center is not going to necessarily be the difference in a playoff series, but they just did not have I would even contend maybe even 10 guys that they could trust. And that to me has been an issue with this roster for several years, and it needs to be something that they address this summer.
Yeah, you say that it doesn't change series, but how many like role players, third string point guards, Tyronn Lue, right, comes in, guards Allen Iverson. And now the Lakers were going to win that series no matter what. But there are plenty of stories over the years of guys at the ends of rosters coming in and playing a role because the matchup just happened to play out perfectly. Guy like Jemison, even, that guy was almost too willing to scrap over the course of the season.
Well, maybe they needed that.
They definitely did.
Yeah.
Dante DiVincenzo picks up a flagrant foul that should have been called a flagrant foul on Luka. You have that cheap shot, and then he goes out and he injures LeBron in a way that LeBron says he wouldn't have been able to finish the series. I would imagine that had Jemison been out there, he would have had something to say to Dante at some point in that game. And you need that in the postseason. You need somebody to go out there where the other team is always kind of looking sideways at, like, what's this guy going to do? What kind of natural emotion is Draymond Green going to try to get away with here? You know? All right, let's
natural. Yeah.
Look, his comments, I'm not going to touch him, but I laughed out loud when I saw them last night. But anyway, let's move on and talk about this offseason to come, because it is the latest, most important offseason in Lakers history, or whatever we're going to call it. And I think, again, the biggest thing to me is going to be a full offseason where Luka and LeBron and Austin and JJ can all put their heads together and figure something out. But I think I'm going to go in kind of reverse order, as it says on the preview there. But I want to start with the Luka JJ conversation and kind of work from there, where Luka likes to have a pick and roll big, likes to have a lob threat, and that allows the defense to have to be, to have to implode to a certain degree. And then you can kick the ball out from there to open shooters and the athletes on the perimeter. That said, JJ, just based on the way that he talked about basketball in his podcasts over the years, the way that he coached this team, especially in the postseason, where Jackson could barely get 5 minutes of game time, and then by the end of the series didn't get any at all. The notion of Luka's preference of probably having more of a traditional center, and JJ Redick's kind of leanings towards 5 out and a almost dogmatic commitment to spacing. Those two things are somewhat antithetical. Where do you think those things stand, or how do you think that all gets worked out?
I think,
or do you even agree with the premise? Because you can obviously disagree with the premise.
Yeah, I'll push back a little in two ways. One, I think Luka's just gonna win this fight. Like he is Luka, and they are trying to get him to sign an extension this summer. They're trying to get him to stay long term. They are handing him the keys to the franchise. So I think if it really comes down to a war of wills, I think Luka is going to win this fight, and I don't think it's really going to be much of a competition. I think already we saw JJ shift more of the offense into being around Luka and Luka's preferences, and I think Jackson's emergence in the like he is already emerging starting in like January, but just some of the best basketball that Jackson played of the season offensively was with Luka. Yeah. And Luka, I think about like the New Orleans game, and I think he started like 9 for 9 that game, and just the way that Luka can set up a big man and a vet minimum backup level big man, make him look like an all-star for a half or 3/4 or whatever. Like that's how special Luka is offensively. So I think I agree with the premise. I would just say that I don't think it's much of a debate, just because I think Luka is the franchise player, and the Lakers are always in the business of treating their stars a certain way, and that has given them that has helped them, I think, get
to
stars
point,
and
they
keep
make
stars for the
Williams
most part.
trade.
Like it's just it's part of the franchise's history. But I think I will give JJ credit, and he talked about this at his exit interview, that like one thing with him this season and moving forward is he's aware that he needs to adapt his coaching style to the team that he has. And I will give him credit in this group having several identities throughout the course of the season in a way that they never had, say, under Darvin Ham or even under Frank Vogel. I think like those two coaches, in my opinion, were more dogmatic to, they had their systems, they had their core principles and beliefs, and they tried to fit all of the players into that, their vision. Whereas I think JJ had more adaptability overall, not necessarily in the postseason, and that's something that I think he needs to learn from moving forward. But I would say now the other part of it that I'll slightly disagree with is I think you can find a way to blend these two in terms of Luka's spread pick and roll. You still need shooting at the other three positions. So it really comes down to that fifth guy of, I think JJ would prefer either a stretch five or just a big wing in that spot, whereas Luka wants the high-flying vertical lob threat pick and roll partner. So I think they're in agreement with the other three guys. Like ideally, those are all 38+% catch and shoot options that can space the floor, can attack closeouts, can run secondary stuff. And I think LeBron and Austin can fit into that. But I think it really just comes down to the center spot, I guess, or one of the front court spots. And I think that's where Luka is going to win because they did the Mark Williams trade and then they rescinded it. I think they will do some type of deal this summer, either trading for someone or clearing some space to sign someone with one of the exceptions. So I think Luka's going to win that battle. Now, when it comes to crunch time, when it comes to their best lineup, that probably comes more down to roster construction and maybe it still is this like death lineup that they had, and maybe with an extra summer training camp preseason, they can fine tune some things and be better. But I think if this really is a battle between like ideologies, I think Luka's going to win that.
I also think he's right.
Yeah.
You need a traditional center, as evidenced by the stuff we talked about the physicality in the postseason. 5 out, I think there are benefits to it, and I think the Lakers do look good very often with some of their 5 out looks offensively when they run sets out of it. But I also think you go into a postseason with Jackson Hayes as your only traditional center, and you kind of get what's coming to you. A guy, while you were talking about the kind of player that maybe blends both of what we're talking about, Larry Nance Jr. is an unrestricted free agent this year. He made $11.2 million last year. I wonder if the Lakers could maybe entice him with their full, even mini mid-level exception. That hard caps him at the second cap or whatever, or the second apron. But he's a guy who he can shoot the three, especially from the corners. He doesn't quite get over the rim the same way he did back when he was a Laker. And he has had some injury issues over the years, but he's a guy who I haven't heard anything about. I haven't even asked about him, but he's a guy who I'm just kind of wondering about. The other part of this too is I had a conversation with Raj, and I've had a few conversations with plenty of other people about this, but the Lakers small ball lineup was excellent in the regular season and really kind of struggled in the postseason. Some of it might be matchup based. Some of it might just be small sample size, which is greatly impacted by 1.5 games where Luka wasn't fully healthy. LeBron, I guess, had some things that were bothering him, and Austin had a toe thing apparently. But still, if the Lakers want to go small, they really have to address their foot speed, I think. And I don't know to what extent you can actually improve your foot speed if your three best players are Luka Doncic, a 41-now-year-old LeBron James, and Austin Reeves. Is that a concern for you too, or am I overthinking that one?
It's a concern. I think you need, I think what we're getting at here is just the lack of physical advantages with this group. I think you need to either be bigger and stronger and just overwhelm with your size and power and force, or if you're going to be smaller, it needs to be more like the Golden State model of a bunch of smart, quick, high IQ players who can read and react and run a certain offensive style And I don't think the Lakers had the roster advantage in either direction. So I think they need to pick one direction and either lean more into size and being bigger and just bludgeoning teams. Although I don't know how much that necessarily goes with the way Luka and JJ want to play. Or I think the more realistic thing is trying to get quicker and faster and more athletic on the perimeter. And that also probably leads to bigger changes. Because to your point, if they are going to say Luka, LeBron, and Austin are the three pillars of the organization, they still believe in that trio, they still want to build around them, then I think everybody else has to be up for examination and under the scrutiny of which physical path do you fit into. And I would contend that you can make a case like most of their top role players don't fit into either path. And that's where there's some harder conversations about, okay, if like which direction do we want to go in terms of building this roster, and how can we then potentially trade or package some of these guys to address some of those needs. But to your point, like I agree. I think the speed was an issue, and it also was an issue that they weren't big. And that's where the small ball thing, it to kind of bring everything together, it was like they were playing small. Those lineups like weren't as good offensively as you would have expected. It was actually the defense where they were dominant. And that's something that I didn't quite think would translate as well into the postseason. And as we saw, it didn't because of the rebounding. They weren't creating as many turnovers. So like they need to, I think, have a clearer vision for what this group wants to be next season and then lean into that. But I think it has to be getting role players that generate more physical advantages in a way that they don't quite have. And again, I think it's like Minnesota and Golden State are two great examples of, and Minnesota kind of has both ends of it, but certainly the size, the physicality, the strength, and then Golden State's more of the speed and the athleticism. And also I think the processing, like they have a lot of guys who can make quick decisions and just read the game at a high level that I don't think the Lakers necessarily have either. So I think they got to get better in one or two directions, one of the two. And right now I feel like they're kind of in the middle. And that's where you can get overpowered by both teams. You can get run off the floor by the Warriors in that game in March, or you could get overpowered in the first round by Minnesota. So like they have to find a way to generate more strengths with their role players, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's tough to win when you're slower and smaller. I just don't think that's a very viable. I made that joke with Raj in last episode, and it's what I keep on coming back to is they were both smaller and slower than Minnesota, and that's how you lose in 5. The Reeves thing here is funny. I'm not going to go so far as to call Rob a liar or anything like that. But when he called Reeves a pillar of the organization, I feel like Anthony Davis was also a pillar of the organization, and Anthony Davis was traded last year. Now, obviously unique situation there. Luka becomes available. Everybody is available on your roster outside of LeBron. And maybe even including LeBron, although LeBron had that no trade clause, so it wouldn't have mattered. But the Austin thing is tough here because I personally, and I think this is how they'll probably play things out based off of what I've heard, but I personally would probably go into training camp, go up to the deadline, probably with Austin on the team, and find out for sure that you can't run stuff with, or that the athletic disadvantages that are presented by a Luka and Austin backcourt, if those are, you can't overcome those things, then okay, some point next season you trade Reeves. I don't think you trade him this offseason. But when he was called a quote pillar of the organization, I don't know. It wasn't necessarily a red flag. I guess it was by as the kids say now, a beige flag for me. It was just a flag. It was just like flagged for me. It was like that. I don't know that he is. How to what extent do you, I guess, believe the Lakers about Austin being a quote pillar of the franchise?
I think I believe it seemingly more than you do, just because I know they've been so high on Austin.
They love him for sure.
Years now, and I think that can't be overlooked. And when you look at, they did not want to include him in a trade for Kyrie Irving. They did not want to include him in a trade for DeJounte Murray. They did not want to include him in a trade for Zach LaVine. It's been a high bar to trade Austin. I've gotten aggregated on this multiple times in the past of like, I haven't had any recent conversations, so I don't know how much has changed post playoffs, but I would assume not much has changed post playoffs, even with the rough series that he had, that like it's been an all-star level return. So that's why like I've had people tweet at me or comment on my YouTube channel about like, let's trade Austin Reeves for Jonathan Isaac. Like, I'm going to tell you now, the Lakers are not going to trade Austin Reeves for a bench player on a mediocre Eastern Conference playoff team. Like, that's just the reality of the situation, regardless of if you think Jonathan Isaac is a better player or a better fit. Like, that is not the type of player that the Lakers are going to be looking for. So I think most people are underestimating both Austin's value and also how the Lakers value Austin. So regardless of what we think about him or whether we think Austin and Luka can fit together or what that looks like you have to factor in what the Lakers think. That is the most important part of this equation. And the Lakers are very, very high on Austin. So I think we view it similarly. I've even contended that I would push it maybe to 20, unless it's like a disaster next season. I think you potentially ride out this next season entirely and see what the Luka Austin backcourt pairing looks like. And we say backcourt pairing, but it's really more of a backcourt pairing offensively because Luka is not a guard defensively. So Luka is a forward. So I think you could still have like Derrick Jones Jr. is probably the perfect guy to complement them. And we saw that in 2024 with the Dallas's finals run. Like, I think the thing I've been getting to is more of an Austin versus Rui conversation in terms of, I don't think both guys can continue to start. I think you have, and potentially even just based on their salaries and kind of their slotting on the roster, maybe it does become more of a like who's on the roster conversation. But I think if we're saying Luka, LeBron, and center X, whoever's the new starting center, like those are 3 fifths of the starting lineup. You can go in one of two directions with the other two spots. You can go with Austin and then a more athletic defensive wing type, or you can go with Rui and then maybe more of like a Max Christie, point of attack type guard defender. Krista just using some player archetypes, but like that to me, I think the Lakers would lean more in the Austin plus an athletic wing direction. And I think also the thing with trading Austin now is like, there is some uncertainty with his contract situation. He is not going to take the extension that the Lakers are going to offer this summer. He's going to opt out in 2026, and he's going to get a bag from somebody, whether it's the Lakers or someone else. He's going to get 30 plus million. So like if you're trading for Austin, you have to factor in he's going to be a great value for the next year, but then you're going to have to pay him next summer. And there's a chance he just leaves if he doesn't like how the year goes or the half season or whatever. So like that, he's a potential flight risk for anyone trading for him. And based on how much the Lakers value him, you're going to have to give up an arm and a leg to get Austin back in a deal. So if you're giving up an all-star level player or a high level starter or whatever, then now you're potentially giving that player up for a 1-year rental. And then Austin goes and signs with another team and becomes, a star for them. So like, I think potentially waiting until his contract is signed and then even pushing this out like a year and a half to the 2020, like a 7 deadline might be more of the move in my opinion. But I think it is a big summer for him and the Lakers and what they decide to do. But my read on the situation is I think he's going to be a Laker through the summer into next season. And it's going to be more building around Luka and Austin and their deficiencies defensively as a duo and how to best support them.
Yeah, I
know I said a lot there. It's just the Austin thing has been it's been percolating for a while.
I think, but all of it was true. I don't think you said anything that I disagree with at all. I don't know how comfortable I am with Austin on 30 mil. Whenever that happens, I wonder what the rest of your cap looks like and what your team's ceiling is with Austin making triple what he makes right now. I think he's insanely underpaid right now. 30 is tough for me. Obviously the Lakers are going to extend the offer for the extension this year. They are going to extend that max extension offer, and they don't anticipate that he is. They know that he is going to turn it down, but I do kind of wonder in the back of their heads. They were like, "Are you sure? Like, could you please rethink the stance there?" Because they're just in this new cap world, as apron world, as Rob calls it. Every dollar matters quite a bit, and we'll see how that plays out. Last thing before we get you out of here, I think it's altogether possible, if not maybe even probable, that this Lakers roster at the beginning of next year looks actually pretty similar to the way that it looked this year. Obviously, they're going to add at least one center. That starting position is going to be filled differently. But I think outside of that, because of how little assets they have to work with, I think it's altogether possible that they basically say, hey, we didn't have much time with this group last year. I can already see how they would try to sell it. Am I overthinking it? like where do
You're
you
not?
think
I think it would be a mistake, and I think one of my bigger criticisms of their decision-making roster building process, and you and I have spoken about this several times now, is like the kind of just kicking the can down the road and being like in terms of maximizing value for trade returns and managing assets. I get it. There is something to be said about waiting until February and the 50-ish game mark, and other teams, their priorities will change, how they value, like guys' prices will drop depending on how their season's going. And perfect example is like Jeremy Grant, right? Like looking at where his trade value was a year ago compared to where his trade value is now, even though an extra year has elapsed and is off of his contract. Like it's night and day how Jeremy Grant was viewed last summer versus this summer. So certainly there are benefits to waiting and either potentially not making a mistake or certain guys having their value. I think DFS is another one where they waited a bit. They could have traded for him last season or over the summer, and his value, just because of his age and his contract situation, ultimately went down just below a first round pick. They were able to get him without giving up a first. My issue with this roster building strategy in general is that it just disrupts continuity. And we made this point last summer of like, build the roster that you want for next season now in the summer. And then if you need to make a tweak or two during the course of the season, make the tweak or two. But I think they continually kick it to the trade deadline. And then it also kind of becomes an excuse, because then they could say, well, we only had this group for 20 games, or we only had this group for 30 games. Yeah. And then it just kind of keeps kicking the can down the road for the next season. And I think they need to, like, their bigger moves have tended to come in season. If you look at post AD trade and post Russ trade, I guess. So post 2021, most of their big moves have come during the course of the season.
Even trading Russ, trading him away, it came in.
I get like managing certain assets and value wise, I get it, but I also think you can't really quantify the benefit of having a training camp and a preseason together. And I think if they're gonna trade Rui, or they're gonna trade DFS, or they're gonna trade Gabe, just do it now. Do it in the summer instead of waiting until the trade deadline. And then now you are disrupting and you are having to figure things out on the fly, and you're swapping a starter out. You're swapping a high-level bench player out, and those things matter. And like, how many of these teams now in the conference semifinals made big trades at the deadline? Golden State is the exception, and their season was like dead, and they needed Jimmy to revive it. Look at everyone else. Indiana,
it took
New York,
Minnesota
Boston,
whole season to figure out
Minnesota. Like these teams have a certain level of OKC, Denver. These teams have had continuity basically from the summer, from training camp, and have been figuring things out as the season has gone on. So I think, of course, like the Luka trade's exception, you make the Luka trade a million times out of a million times. I'm not like, that's not an example here, but just the the Westbrook trade in 2023 and like
Yeah.
just some of these situations where they're looking to solve their problems in season, I think it's not the best way to actually build roster continuity. And it also kind of gives you an excuse to just say, well, hey, we never figured it out. We need more time. And you only have so much more time, especially with LeBron. So I think they need to be more aggressive this summer compared to next season.
Yeah, the Dodgers president of baseball operations, Andrew Friedman, had a quote this last summer where he said, I want to do all of my work in the winter meetings so that I don't have to do anything at the trade deadline. That's how my ideal season plays out. Unfortunately, it looks like he's going to have some work to do because all of his starters got hurt again. But still, like it is the kind of thing. But like that's how I would prefer to do it too, because you now have a nice sample size before the trade deadline with a team that you were at least somewhat committed to going into the season. The last few years going into the season, it's hanging over everybody's head. Yeah, we know eventually some of these guys aren't going to be here anymore. We know the Lakers aren't actually all that committed to the team that they enter seasons with. And I think that's where they've really kind of suffered. And this season especially, there was so much to figure out and so little time to figure it out. Your margins for error are minute. And it's just a really difficult spot. So I agree with you 100%. I'm just also kind of mentally prepping myself for that media day where it's like, hey, we finally get practice time, everybody. We finally get some time here together before we have to make some of these decisions. And some of it might even come by necessity because of how few assets they actually have to work with. But yeah, I'm with you. Whatever work that needs to be done, do it in the summer. And then whatever tweaks you need to make over the course of the season, that's what you make tweaks in the season. You make moves in the summer. Jovan, this has been a lot of fun. This has been another fun episode here. Congratulations on a great season covering the team, and best of luck this upcoming off season of taking a deep breath and moving forward here. However you will. Anything that you want to plug before we get you out of here?
No, just plug my YouTube channel, Jovan Buha, and my podcast, Buha's Block, and my work at The Athletic. I got a couple stories coming out next week, and we'll be still churning out content all off season long. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. And I've already kind of teased it a little bit, but your show, my show, and LFR, we're all kind of working together here at Odyssey. And we are working on intro outro stuff and graphics on it, but eventually we're going to start doing podcast episodes, the three of us together, plus other people from around Lakers coverage too. So I'm excited about all of that. Until then, and until the next time you guys hear from us, I'm Anthony Irwin. That was Jovan Buha. This has been the Lakers Lounge. Have a great rest of your weekend. Make somebody else's, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Nope, not tomorrow. God, no, not tomorrow. We'll talk to you guys on Sunday.
Bye, everyone.